and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. And welcome to the final entry of Movie Adaptation Month. Oh my god, is he doing this review because he's not associated with Channel Awesome anymore and that crossover was the Nostalgia Critics? Yeah, no. No, I was planning on doing this review even before all that went down. The crossover was made in 2009, 10 years ago. At the time, Superman 4 was considered the worst theatrical Superman film. Its politics were naive at best, its writing insipid and dumb, the plot is incomplete, the humor is lame, and the effects... yeah. In the decade that followed, we have had many more Superman movies. And while Superman 4 is still terrible, at least it feels like they got the character right. At least it's in color. But the thing is that I decided to take another look at the movie in its comic form because I thought it'd be interesting not only to revisit a review like that, written with a crossover in mind versus a single person's review, and the benefit of several years worth of maturity as a critic. Now when I say boner, it's done all classy-like. But also to see if the adaptation can improve on the faults of the film. Sure, all the movies that I've reviewed for this month have been bad, but this is the only one that felt like it could have been saved. And while it's rare, I have reviewed movie adaptations on this show that were better than the film. Hellraiser 3 and Catwoman both come to mind. And hey, there is potential with the plot of the movie, so maybe the comic is actually a massive improvement. So let's dig into Superman 4, The Quest for Peace movie special, and see how this works out when I'm not doing it as a crossover.
Crossover!
What?
We said we were going to do a Superman 4 crossover.
Oh, we were going to cover the movie. This is the comic of the movie.
Stupid.
How did you get in here?
Stealing your stuff.
Ah, damn it!
Welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a birdie hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Linkara, coins, robots, Amazon and trucks. Linkara, this comic sucks. Linkara.
The cover's pretty damn good. Instead of the film strip stuff on the sides that we saw in the Batman movie adaptations, we've got just the comic panels as comic panels running along them. But of course, our eyes are immediately drawn to Superman and the villain of the movie, Nuclear Man, fighting over the American flag. Man, they're really taking some creative liberties with this new version of From the Earth to the Moon. Also, unlike the other comics we've looked at this year, it's not the official comic adaptation, but rather a DC movie special. You know those other DC movie comics? Not special at all. Something that you'll notice about the artwork right away, it's not even trying to get the likenesses of the actors down. This is an all-star team of artists on this. Kurt Swan, Don Heck, Frank McLaughlin, Alvey, John Beatty, and Dick Giordano, and they just straight up made it look like a regular Superman comic of the time. Admittedly, there are some changes that more closely reflect the movie, but they're not trying to recreate Christopher Reeves as Superman. This is just pure comic Superman. We open in orbit on a Russian spacecraft, where apparently there's a tear in the fabric of space because of this massive pink energy cloud behind them.
Too much pink energy is dangerous.
In the movie, a random piece of space junk just happens to hit them. What it was, or how it managed to hit them, considering space is, you know, big, is unexplained, but here it's just a random asteroid. In both, an astronaut doing a spacewalk has their tether disconnected and sends them off into space, but Superman arrives to help him. Man, all Sandra Bullock had to do in Gravity was wait for Superman to come save her. Later, Clark goes back to Smallville, where we learn that his mother has died between movies. He's selling off the old farm, and we get a scene that is indeed better handled in the comic, where he goes into the barn, travels down to where the rocket he arrived in is stored, and there's just a glowing green crystal with exposition from his birth mother to explain what it is. But it's presented in a way as to make it look like he's remembering this thing versus what happens in the comic, accidentally activating a stored recording of Jor-El. And indeed, as another example of this going by the comic looks, it's clearly comic Jor-El and not Marlon Brando. Placed aboard this vessel is an energy module. All that remains of Krypton's once great civilization. I mean, aside from Argo, the Phantom Zone criminals, and the other crystal that was here that you used to create the Fortress of Solitude. Oh, and there may be a dog, a bottled city, depending on the time of day, a doomsday weapon or two, and man, a lot of our civilization survived Krypton's destruction. It is my last gift to you, my son. The power in the module can be used but once. Use it wisely, my son. Bitcoin mining, here I come! I love how it doesn't even explain what sort of things the energy module can do. Like, is it just a big battery? Later, Clark heads to work but misses a subway train, the radio in the background mentioning that arms control talks have broken down. However, as the train takes off, Clark uses his X-ray vision to spot that the train operator is having a heart attack. And I guess Metropolis's public transit system never decided to incorporate a dead man switch into this stuff, since the train soon goes out of control. He quickly changes into Superman and stops it. I'll get him to the hospital, officers. You'd better call in for someone else to run the train. It's a good thing emergency workers were here and ready in the less than a minute that has transpired. Elsewhere, Lex Luthor is working on a chain gang to dig at some rocks when an absolutely hideous car drives up to the cops, blaring music. They tell the driver he's in a restricted area, but then get distracted by the car's sound system, which even has little horns on the sides. Hey, this is a heck of a sound system you're getting, kid. The latest thing, Sense Around 100. I honestly cannot tell if that was meant to be a pun or if they just didn't know how to spell sense around. The driver invites them to hop in the car and experience it, and because these cops are idiots, they agree, allowing him to remotely drive the car off a cliff. This is Lenny Luthor, played by John Cryer in the film, and for some reason, Lex tells the kid to open the car doors before the car goes off the cliff to let the cops out. I mean, he was just gonna cause earthquakes to shatter California and murder countless numbers of people for a really crappy real estate scheme, but two of his jailers getting killed? He's not a monster! The two make their escape, and we cut over to the Daily Planet, where Clark is arriving. The planet has been bought out by a man named David Warfield, basically a Rupert Murdoch XP, although in the comic, they drew him like Walt Disney. Make of that what you will. Anyway, Warfield is there with his daughter Lacey to inform them that the Daily Planet hasn't turned a profit in 3 years, and they need to actually sell some newspapers to get the thing going. Thus, they have designed a new layout, which looks exactly like the old layout in the comic. In the movie, it was made into more of a tabloid with a hyperbolic title and a woman in a bikini on the front. Whereas here, it's just a newspaper with "Peace Summit Kaput, is world at brink?" Which, honestly, these days feels less sensationalistic and more just that the editor got bored. The Warfields are holding their contracts, so the staff can't quit or object about anything they're doing, according to Lacey. Clark goes up to her. I don't think we're being treated fairly, Miss Warfield. We'll all do our best to cooperate with you, but our first allegiance is to the truth. The people of Metropolis depend on us, and we can't let them down. Thank you. I don't agree with what you're doing, and I'm just going to stand here and take it because this is a movie where that sort of thing actually convinces people to become good, as opposed to continuing to be assholes to us. And indeed, Lacey is intrigued by how genuine and non-confrontational Clark is. No offense, but he's not interested in a woman like you. You know, someone who doesn't have LL as their initials. What's especially shocking to me with them going with the comic designs versus what was in the movie here was that what was subtext has just become straight up text, as indicated here when the president announces that with the failure of the arms summit that the USA needs to be second to none in the nuclear arms race. They just straight up made it Reagan instead of some other guy. And because the summit has failed, we have no choice but to move ahead with our arms buildup. As such, I am officially announcing the formation of Reagan's Raiders. A schoolroom is watching the president's broadcast, and the teacher asks for suggestions for things they can do. One kid, Jeremy, suggests they write a letter to Superman to get rid of all the nuclear weapons. And as we all know, nuclear weapons were the only reason that the Cold War was happening. At the Metropolis Museum, Lex and Lenny have arrived to steal a strand of Superman's hair that's on display. Lex thinks that with it, he can make a clone of Superman. With enough nuclear power to mutate those genes, I can create an even greater Superman, but one with absolute allegiance to me, and with 95% more radiation sickness. Back at the Daily Planet, Lacey flirts with Clark, suggesting that he write a new feature series on Metropolis After Hours, even suggesting he wear contacts. Although when his glasses come off, he honestly looks more like Reagan in this panel. Weird. Anyway, Jeremy's letter arrives at the Daily Planet in the hopes of getting to Superman, and Lois decides to show it to Clark. Why she does so isn't really clear other than the plot needs it to happen. And only Superman can make sure we don't blow ourselves up. Once you've gotten rid of all the nuclear weapons, the world will be a happier place. Yeah, and it's a good thing nobody ever harms each other with conventional weapons, or else we'd be screwed. Lacey sees this as a big promotional thing they can take advantage of. Fly the kid out to Metropolis and demand that Superman answer him. But it seems in a deleted scene from the movie, Superman just goes and answers him directly, interrupting his class. I've wanted to answer Jeremy's letter personally. I wanted to tell you that what you ask is impossible. I've made a vow not to interfere with the destiny of your planet. You see, Jeremy, your planet is over there, and over there needs to take care of its own problems. He says he'll pass the letter on to the leaders of the world, since they represent it. I wonder if he would have actually done this if not for Lacey bringing up that big campaign. The Daily Planet has got to get tons of letters like this because there's no official place to send correspondences to Superman. Over to Luthor's lair, located in the Metropolis Tower. How he has anything there when he was operating out of a sewer in the first movie is anyone's guess. Where he's using the genetic material to create the Superman clone. Yeah, in case you were unaware, Superman 4 had a lot of cutscenes in it, with a major one being the first nuclear man, who was mostly played for laughs. Because a story about nuclear disarmament and Superman questioning how far he should impose his will on Earth really needed a lot of comedic scenes. He's kind of a takeoff of Bizarro, but not. It's weird. Anyway, Luthor tosses him some clothes.
What I need these for?
Well, we can hardly call you the Scarlet Super if you're not wearing clothes. After demonstrating that the clone has all of Superman's powers, while also hitting his head when he tries to fly, Lex says he needs to test the clone out properly, and he decides to unleash it on a nightclub called Chic Disco. You know, maybe Movie Lex needs to retire the whole greatest criminal mind thing if his first target is a disco in 1987. It's the same club that Lacey drags Clark to that night. I've never been in a place like this before. Get used to it. This is what you'll be writing about. Metropolis After Hours. Wow, a boring nightclub with no decor where a bunch of bland jackasses dance badly. Truly, this is the juicy material that'll get the Daily Planet out of debt. The clone enters, tossing aside the bouncers easily. However, he soon spots Lacey and decides he wants her, though another woman suddenly grabs the clone and pulls him out back. Not much of a talker, huh? That's okay. I go for the strong, silent type. Let's just get this unbuttoned and... Okay, I take it back. At this nightclub, women will randomly pull you into an alley to give you a blowjob, I guess. When she unbuttons his shirt, though, she screams. And I'm not sure why. Does it burn to touch him? Does he have no nipples? Did she suddenly realize how weird it is to try to just have sex with someone in an alley out of nowhere? In any case, Clark hears her scream and quickly changes, confronting Nuclear Man 1. The two briefly fight, but Supes is able to toss him into an electrical tower, frying the clone. Whatever it was, he wasn't human. At least that's what I'll tell the cops if they ask. And the high voltage wires burned him like he was paper. Superman doesn't care when he accidentally kills someone. Lex and Lenny, observing from nearby, comment on the death of the first nuclear man. I must have miscalculated. Obviously, the amount of radiation I used couldn't generate enough mutant power in the cells. Lex Luthor has proven it. That guy was radioactive, and it was not good. He speculates that if he created it in the heart of the sun, it would solve his problems.
Of course! Don't you know anything about science?
The next day, the Warfields greet Jeremy after flying him into town. The kid tells the reporters how Superman said he wouldn't get rid of the nuclear weapons. Soup's the kid! Drop dead! Who cares about that? I want to read more about that chic disco that just opened. At the Planet offices, Perry White has had enough and decides to go downtown to do something about the acquisition of the newspaper. Jimmy wonders if he's going for another job. I don't think Mr. White would give up the Planet that easily, Jimmy. Why not? Look how easily Superman gave up. He didn't give up. Call it what you want, Clark. There's still nothing any of us can do. It's Superman's decision. And thus I will say he gave up, even though he didn't really fight anything and gave a reasonable answer to the situation. Anyway, we have no agency or power of our own. We're basically pawns in Superman's world. Superman travels to the Fortress of Solitude to try to decide if he should intervene, which is why I've come to ask you for advice, Elders of Krypton. I know I have been forbidden to act, but the Earth faces a fate as terrible as Krypton's. Why the hell did Jor-El program the Elders of Krypton into the escape ship? Weren't these Elders the dumbasses who didn't want to do anything to save Krypton? And said Elders are keeping that streak going.
The Earth is too primitive. You can flee to a world where war has been long forgotten. Run away from this stupid planet, Kal-El. Be selfish and hang out with other aliens. This is why we're the Elders. We have such useful advice. If you teach these people to put their faith in one man, even yourself, you are teaching them to be betrayed. Better wisdom, but still stupid when coupled with the previous statement. You have taught me well, but sometimes there is more to learn from children than from the wisest of men. I don't know, go and hang out with aliens really feels like advice from children.
Soon, Superman arrives in Metropolis, where Jimmy, Lois, and Lacey are showing Jeremy around town. Superman takes Jeremy and they head to the United Nations building, which I guess is in Metropolis now, despite New York still existing. Superman heads right into the main chamber, and everyone is okay with this. Also, something I just noticed, especially because it's really evident in the United Nations scene, there is a stunning lack of non-white people in this comic. Like, the only ones I've seen are one black guy at the Daily Planet in a single panel, and then a black kid in Jeremy's class. But yeah, the only people we get a clear look at in the UN are white people too. Kinda surprising. However, that is the least stupid thing in the scene, not helped by them dropping one of the few good things that the scene had going for it in the movie. The Secretary General saying that Superman needed a sponsor to speak to the delegates, and every country on Earth saying they'll sponsor him because, hey, Superman. Nope, she just lets him speak.
For many years, I've lived among you as a visitor. I've seen beauty in your many cultures, and felt joy in your many accomplishments. Microwave popcorn, for instance. Good job on that one. I've also seen the folly of your wars. As of today, I am no longer a visitor. The Earth is my home, too. So I guess what I'm asking is, does anyone have a couch I can crash on? We cannot live in fear. I cannot watch you stumble towards the madness of nuclear destruction. I am going to do what your governments have been unable to do. I am going to rid the Earth of all nuclear weapons.
One needs to put aside the question of nuclear weapons on their own. If the deterrent has kept us from worse wars, or if the horror of the weapons themselves makes them unworthy of existence. Because the real question here is Superman. Up to this point, the movie pays a lot of lip service to the idea that Superman is going to make a choice, and that whatever he chooses will be the right choice. And it is not. Not at all. Superman has just unilaterally declared himself the highest authority on this planet and stated that he will rid the world of nuclear weapons. He did not consult anyone with actual elected authority. It was his choice to make, according to him, and everyone around him. Many times in comics, the question of how far Superman should go is raised. If he truly is the moral compass by which so many people look to for answers, shouldn't he make decisions that affect more people? Intervene for the sake of life, even in places where he may not be welcome? Ultimately, comics tend to give the same answer. No. He is not a god. People focus so much on the super part of his name that they forget that he is just a man. He's trying to do the right thing, but he's not perfect. Being a superhero is not a decision to become the leader of people. It is one made in service to people. A modern-day knight-errant who will help the helpless and right wrongs. It is not to dictate to entire nations, I am above you. And if this movie was willing to raise that question, to actually be the story of Superman going too far and needing to be brought back down to Earth, then it might have been a good movie. But it's not. It's the story of Superman taking over the world, and how we should be applauding him for doing so. Because the comic never says why exactly governments have been unable to rid the Earth of nuclear weapons, as if nukes are just some natural disaster that they can't handle or something. Like everyone was proclaiming, oh dear, I'd love to get rid of all my nuclear weapons, but I just can't lift them. But apparently in this story, that's the case. Everyone is happy about this, and in a montage, we see him launching nuclear missiles into the sun. One from the Soviet Union, one from the USA, one from... Wait, is that the Target logo? Man, department stores really do have everything! And soon we see both the American and Soviet forces equally discarding their nukes at an equal level and being happy about it. Clearly a reflection of reality, of course, but Luthor is gathering a bunch of evil people together to stop this. A nuclear strategist for a think tank, a nuclear arms dealer, and a Soviet general eager to start a proper war up. Which they can't do if there are no nuclear missiles, no backsies. He shows off the remains of the first nuclear man to them. Call it a genetic stew. Place it in one of your missiles, and when Superman tosses it into the sun, he'll get the surprise of his life. In the form of a nuclear man.
There is logic in what he says.
How the hell this all works is never explained. In the movie, he has a computer that'll apparently help with all of this. Although, frankly, with the nuclear radiation, genetic material, and a computer on board, I think we've discovered the true origins of that nightmarish figure, Mr. Computer. And he just wants a cut of the profits of their nuclear arms sales once they're all back in business. If these countries were so eager to get rid of these nukes, why would they start buying them back up again? And thus the plan goes off, with Superman tossing the missile with the genetic material, computer, and whatnot into the sun like all the others. Unlike the movie, where the previously mentioned computer was supposed to weave a costume for him, Nuclear Man emerges from the sun completely naked. How come you're so sure the nuclear guy is gonna find his way back here? Lenny, I am not a genius for nothing. The remains I used will give this new nuclear man all the genetic memories of the original. He'll know where to go.
This makes no sense, and yet it's working.
And thus he arrives, and I guess Lex already knew what he'd look like since he has his costume all ready for him. He tries to test his reflexes, but the ruler he taps him with melts upon touching him. I hadn't counted on this. The solar power has given him internally generated heat. So, just like everybody else. After Lenny insults Nuclear Man, he shows off his most devastating power. Making people float in the air. A lesser-known side effect of radiation poisoning. Lex leads Nuclear Man into a dark room where he suddenly freezes. Of course, that's his weakness. He draws his energy direct from sunlight. Without it, he's like you. Useless. I don't know, I think he'd kind of make a cool display piece for parties. Can't say that about Lenny. Yes, our solar-powered Nuclear Man. An old review of the movie I read suggested the idea behind this might be that nuclear missiles can't really be launched effectively in bad weather, which was seen in the movie when they were close to canceling a launch. Thus, Nuclear Man can't really be effective in anything less than direct sunlight. Although that makes even less sense because that's about the mechanics of the rocket and not the nuclear material itself. But whatever at this point. What follows is a bit that should have been cut from the movie. The farcical sequence of Lois and Lacey trying to hang out with Clark and Superman at the same time, and him continually switching outfits. And yeesh, the artwork in this scene is off. I blame it mostly on the hairstyles. Lois has had no favors to her in this entire book thanks to that hair. It just looks big and poofy and outdated and, well, not reflective of her character. And now Lacey just has everything all combed back and it just doesn't look appealing to look at. But yeah, the scene itself is really, really pointless. Luthor contacts Superman in a convoluted, nonsensical means to get him to come to the Metropolis Tower, a TV signal that only he can see. Then again, in this comic, it looks more like a billboard than a TV, which is bizarre, of course, but honestly, the movie is legitimately that weird. I don't think there's a single scene that doesn't have something wrong with it. Yeah, I know that means that you'll probably like it. After arriving at the tower, Lex introduces Supes to Nuclear Man. Destroy Superman! I don't think that's gonna have quite the same staying power as Kneel Before Zod. And then in a really big moment of what the hell, Nuclear Man grows in size and then reduces back down again. And he never uses that power again. It's just something for this scene. So when the writers heard that radiation gives people superpowers in comics, they just assumed it gives them all the powers. And so they get into a fight as they fly across the globe. Nuclear Man creates a tornado that happened in a deleted scene. He destroys the Great Wall of China, though in the comics, Superman just reassembles it using super speed versus his magic wall repair vision from the movie, until finally they're back in New York and the Statue of Liberty. Nuclear Man lifts the entire statue up, and Superman has to catch it and bring it back down. And meanwhile, the Ghostbusters are inside of it going, "Dude, what the hell?" As Superman tries to put it back in place, Nuclear Man slashes at him with his fingers, which causes him to get extraordinarily weak. After Nuclear Man tosses him into the air, that causes Superman's cape to get caught in the statue. Later, as Lois tries to contact Clark, Warfield compliments Lacey's job in running the paper, and he's somehow gotten his hands on Superman's cape. However, Lois snatches it out of his hands and quits. Warfield doesn't mind, even telling Lacey to fire Clark Kent too, because he hasn't been in the office for days. Oh, Daddy. Stuff it. What a compelling character arc Lacey has gone through, what with how she was horny for a guy and this made her not want to be a jerk. Something definitely cut out of the movie, as we see in the comic, is Lex pitching the nuclear rearmament to the Pentagon and the Kremlin, arguing that without Superman to enforce the removal of nuclear weapons, the other side will do their best to rearm their own stockpiles. So again, really, it all comes down to Superman is making us do this and is threatening us if we don't. Wouldn't the USSR just assume he's working for the American government anyway? Lex, being a dick, breaks off his partnership with the others so he can take all the money for himself, threatening them with Nuclear Man if they try to retaliate. Lois, meanwhile, goes to Clark to check on him. He claims to have the flu, and obviously he's not in good shape. Lois gives the cape to him for reasons that only make sense if she either actively or subconsciously knows he's Superman. With no other choice as his health and appearance deteriorate, Clark pulls out the Kryptonian inanimate carbon rod and he uses it to restore himself to health. Somehow. Off-panel. Nuclear Man, spotting Lacey's picture in the paper, I guess he still remembers her from the club in his previous life, despite him not even getting close to her in this version, and decides to kidnap her from the Daily Planet offices and take her back to the Metropolis Tower. He says she'll be his queen, but first, he wants to have fun. And his form of fun is... he transforms himself into a nuclear missile?!
Is this the human condition of madness, leader? It is.
Both the USA and the Soviet Union see this missile launch but can't determine the target. Not that it matters anyway, because Superman shows up none the worse for wear at the tower. He takes Lacey with him to get Nuclear Man's attention, and indeed, he reverts back to normal to chase them. He hides her somewhere, and the two confront one another. Though it'd be more accurate to say, Nuclear Man causes random destruction and mischief while Superman tries to fix it. He leads Nuclear Man into an elevator shaft to cut him off from the sun. I was gonna give the comic the benefit of the doubt and say Luthor told Superman about the sun weakness off-panel, but nope, Superman just says he figured out that he was trying to stay in sunlight, when I have seen no evidence of that being the case. He brings him to the moon to try to keep him imprisoned, whether permanently held there or just temporarily is not said, but a tear in the metal allows sunlight to peer through and touch Nuclear Man, restoring him to full strength and leading to a brief brawl. Nuclear Man finds Lacey again, but before he can take her away once more, Superman forces the moon out of orbit to create a solar eclipse! Admittedly, we don't see him pushing the moon directly like in the movie, but the comic confirms he did so! He takes the immobilized Nuclear Man to a nuclear power plant. In here, his unstable structure will dissolve. Ashes to ashes, atoms to atoms. You idiot! You just turned him into Dr. Manhattan! We'll ignore how that doesn't make any sense and just catch up with Soups as he gives Luthor and Lenny back to the authorities. At the Daily Planet, Perry White comes back to inform Warfield that he convinced the bank to buy him a controlling share of the paper, so now he's in charge again, where the planet can resume not making money. And so our comic ends in, frankly, a considerably better fashion than the movie. While not as frequently used as the other clips we've seen this past month, I have used on occasion the clip of Superman declaring how world peace is achieved.
And there will be peace. There will be peace when the people of the world want it so badly
that their governments will have no choice but to give it to them.
Basically saying that the reason world peace doesn't happen is because we don't want it bad enough. Instead, Superman gives an impassioned speech to the United Nations about viewing the world as one planet, even having Jeremy along with him. He still kind of says the "we need to want it" stuff, but it doesn't feel as condescendingly dumb in this, especially since he follows it up by having Jeremy fly above the Earth with him while talking about it to the news services. "I see the weather in the ocean currents, and the mountains and the rivers, but I can't see the borders between the countries. It's all one world." This is a weird adaptation of the Once and Future King. "And when we all see it that way, then there will be no more war." Or people will find other reasons to go to war, because that happens a lot. Anyway, this comic sucks, but only because of the movie it's based on. It is, however, a considerable improvement over the film. It's certainly not perfect. As a result of still being tied into the movie it's based on, there are many scenes of padding or just plain naivete about what they're saying in regards to Superman removing nuclear weapons. The plot still has innumerable things that do not make a lick of sense, plus the insane scope of Nuclear Man's powers. And I noticed none of said powers actually have to do with anything nuclear. But it does fix a lot of scenes from the movie, too, explaining away plot holes thanks to the presence of certain deleted scenes, while also concluding some subplots a lot more effectively, like the Jeremy stuff that just disappears from the movie halfway through. I'm also not particularly fond of Superman killing Nuclear Man. Yes, I know, people can cite times when Superman is killed, but I don't like it at all, and this one's a pretty egregious example of just cold-blooded murder. He doesn't even consider the implications of taking Nuclear Man's life. Seems like it would have made more sense to have him, like, explode or have a literal meltdown because of the radioactive material inside of him, not get murdered in a nuclear power plant. But it's still an interesting adaptation in that it doesn't really use the movie likenesses at all, but instead follows the comics. It's certainly not the worst comic or movie, but it's not a good movie at all, and the comic is only so much better than it. Next time, we begin the long-anticipated retrospective on Cassandra Cain. Starting off, of course, with
Superman 4 crossover, watch it on movie nights. Bye!
I'm sitting on my couch reviewing comics, the worst words that you will ever see. It's sad that comic books are for geeks, but they're not. They're for everybody. If you doubt that I am a man, I am a man.
All men like me. I'm very, very rich.